Hey guys, it's Wanda from Crazy Days, and we're continuing on with our series on women and women topics. And today we have with us Renata, who is a modern midwife. You know, you don't hear too much about that anymore, and so she's going to tell a little bit of her story, but I wanted to give a little background right quick. Renata and I actually met probably in the 90s, mid-90s. She doesn't remember it, but I do, because there's not many people named Renata that are midwives. And I had 3 children at home. I have 5 children. I had 2 in the hospital, 3 I had home births. And after I had those 3, I wanted to help other people, and I wanted to become a midwife. So a friend of mine and I went to one of her classes. The friend, I believe, became a midwife. I don't know if she's a practicing midwife, but she did go through the classes and things, I believe. And I went one time and then kind of backed out. I can help with births if I had to, but I would not want to be the primary. But I had 3. So you want to introduce yourself, tell us a little background and why you got into midwifery.
Okay, well, I'm Renata Hill, and we live over in George County, Mississippi right now. And hopefully that's where we're going to stay. It's where we're from most of our lives. I started out as just a mom having a kid at 18. And it was not a real great experience for me personally.
That's the way my first 2 were not great experiences, exactly. It wasn't nothing terrible, but it just wasn't natural.
Yeah. Made me come home and go, wow, because I come from big families. So my mom was one of 6, my dad was one of 10. And of course they were all born at home back those days. And it literally made me come home and go visit my grandfather, who was still alive, and say, did Grandma do that on purpose 6 times? Because that was not a great time. And in between the birth of our first child and 4 years later when we had our next child, I had gone off to become a Bradley childbirth instructor. I had started, the word doula wasn't around back then.
Yeah.
So I started helping friends having births, having unassisted births, because I didn't know anything about midwives. I didn't know a midwife. And actually, probably about 6 years into helping other people, one of the grandmothers, when I was introduced to her on one of the days I visited her daughter and granddaughter, she said, "Oh yeah, she's your midwife." Then I went, "Oh gosh, no." That is way too much weight on my shoulders. But God did convict me.
But people think of midwives as way back in the day.
Yeah.
And the lady that was called in the middle of the night to come help with the birth. And
well,
you are that lady, right?
They still get called in the middle of the night.
You are that
Most
lady.
of my calls are 12 to 2 o'clock. In every house that we've had for 30 years, the phone's on my side of the bed. Because Andy, my husband, knows that's not for me. That's for her. So I've been attending home births. I'm self-taught. When I started in the 80s, late 80s and early 90s, there were no schools for midwifery. That was not a route. That was an option around here. So I read every book I could. For the first decade, I presented myself as a helper, not a midwife. Because to me, that title just in my brain signified this ancient woman. In fact, when I got called a midwife by that grandmother at her granddaughter's house, I came home, and my husband to this day says that I had a different look on my face that day. It was one of sheer horror. And he said, "Is our mom and baby okay?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "So what's the matter?" I said, "Oh my gosh, her grandmother called me a midwife." And he said, "So?" I said,
"Isn't that what you do?"
I said, "I can't be a midwife." And he said, "Why not?" I said, "Well, they're ancient and they know everything about birthing babies, and they've caught 1,000 babies." And he just calmly got up, went to the Webster Dictionary, brought it back in, opened it up, and he said, "Read that." And it said, midwife, a woman helping other women during the childbearing year. He said, doesn't say she's old, doesn't say she knows everything, doesn't say she's caught 1,000 babies.
Nope.
And
she just assists.
the reality of that weight on my shoulders, really, I mean, at 26 years old, scared me to death.
So you've been doing this since you were in your 20s.
And I caught my first baby when I was 21.
Wow.
As a friend, not a midwife. So it scared me. It really did. The reality of being responsible for the well-being of not one but 2 people.
Yes.
And that just weighed really heavy on me. And I do tell people, and if there are midwives out there that hear this, there are different flavors of midwives nowadays. I never chose to be a midwife. I was on my way to Southern to become a business degree and a degree in family psychology. God had other plans. And when he put it on me, I knew what I was supposed to do, but like so many of us, I ran full steam in the other direction. Oh my gosh, I can't do that. I have to do it uniformly the way our culture wants us to do it. And so I tried that all the way up until like 92, catching babies at home all the time. And in 92, I finally realized I needed to listen to what God said. And I needed to step away from the medically accepted route, and I needed to attend his kids at home. And that's what I started doing, and it has been a blessing for all those years. I always tell people the worst thing about being a midwife is you're on call 365 days of the year, 24 hours a day.
Okay, so how many babies have you got?
We're knocking 1,000 at home right now.
Whoa.
And I don't, my daughter asked me that the other day, and I said, baby, I don't know. I know I passed 800 10 years ago. I don't know now.
So do you assist at the hospital also if they allow it?
If it's one of my clients,
Yes.
in our present situation, it's kind of bounced back and forth for the last 48 months.
Yeah.
So,
But before that, they would allow you in.
yeah, and they still do. I mean, depending on if I know the physician and the hospital I'm at, they won't let other people in, but they will let Daddy and me go in with them.
Okay.
I did that, I guess, back in March. I stayed with one
Okay.
up in Hattiesburg. So there was a season back in December that they wouldn't let me come, same hospital. So it just depends, and now we're seeing that swing again, where it's just mommy and daddy.
It would be iffy right now.
It would, and I tell moms that when they're procuring my services, it's like you need to call the hospital that's going to be your backup or whatever, and see what their policy is today. And it may change next week.
You do always have a backup. You do not just simply depend on her or your midwife. You do have a backup. You recommend that.
I recommend it. I don't make them anymore.
Yeah.
My
You
husband,
recommend it.
Yeah, my husband bit me with that one time because we had 4 babies. The last one was born at home, and I was always that way to start with. Like, you got to go see a doctor at least once, and da 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 da. And my husband had his ears listening to a conversation one day, and after the mom left, he said, "So if you got pregnant today, and you went to a midwife, and she told you you had to go see a medical doctor," he said, "Would you go?" And I went, "Oh God," busted. I said, "No," I said, but I let them know that it's a lot more gracious if we have to go into the hospital, if you've got a doctor you've seen at least once.
Yeah.
Than to go in there and say, "Oh no," because you more than likely now with the increase of home births in the state of Mississippi, where I live, and in Alabama greatly, in the state of Mississippi, you're probably going to meet a nurse on that floor that knows about home birth, has probably had an encounter with midwives. Whether or not they're friendly towards it, that's a whole different thing. I've been really blessed that in all of the areas I serve, God has provided me great, I don't want to say backup because doctors don't want that word used because that's a liability, but I've been blessed with physicians and nurse practitioners that would consult with my clients so that if we had a problem or had to go to the hospital, they would jump in there and treat them civilly instead of hostilely.
When I was pregnant with my 3rd child, I decided I wanted home birth. I had just made a profession of faith the year before. My whole outlook on life changed. I'd had 2 births in the hospital. One of them, I was in labor for hours, like 12, 14 hours, and ended up with an episiotomy, sore for days, couldn't move, all the things that I didn't like. And when I got pregnant with my 2nd child, a son, the first one was a daughter, second was a son, I knew absolutely nothing about childbirth. I had a child, and I did not know about childbirth. And they sent this little pamphlet home, and I'm flipping through it because you go to the doctor, you're like you go once a month, and then you last couple of months you go every 2 weeks, and then the last month you go every week, and they tell you what you can eat and what you can't eat and how you do and all this stuff. And they sent this little pamphlet. I was flipping through that pamphlet, and I come across where it's showing the birth of the baby, and I'm like, I know nothing about this. I've already had 1 kid. I did not even know the whole process, even though I had a child. And I read that, and I went through and had the 2nd one. I barely made it to the hospital. I got there, and he was born 30 minutes later. They gave me the epidural, and it didn't take effect till after he was born.
Wow.
So I had 2 experiences in the hospital, totally different, with each one, and in that process with my son, they cracked my tailbone. Did not say a word to me. I heard the doctor say something to the nurse about, hey, look, her tailbone just cracked. But when I went to leave the hospital, I asked the nurse, I said, okay, so what do I do about a cracked tailbone? And she said, well, what? I said, when I had the baby, the doctor said, she said, oh, don't worry about it. Not any explanation, no nothing, just. So when I found out I was pregnant with the third one, I had just made a profession of faith a few months earlier. My whole outlook was different. I'm like, okay, I'm pregnant again. Let's see what, I don't know if I want to go back into the hospital. And this was in the 80s. He was born in 85. And I was like, what do I do? So I'm like you. I researched everything, even water births. I mean, every Lamaze, the whole 9 yards. I knew I couldn't get my husband at the time to go to Lamaze, but I mean, I looked at it. I read everything on it. And so when people found out I wasn't going to the doctor, they go, how come you're not going to the doctor? And I'm going, I'm not sick. And they said, but you're pregnant. I said, exactly. I'm pregnant. I'm not sick. And these people kept pushing me to go to a doctor, and I said, but there's nothing wrong with me. I'm healthy. I'm a healthy person. Pregnancy is healthy, right? It's natural.
Yep.
When you get pregnant, that baby's coming. You ain't seen a baby stay yet, have you?
No.
Not one.
They don't live there.
They don't stay. So I kept telling them it was natural. This is a natural process. And you tell your patients that all the time. This is natural. Don't make it something it's not. It's not a disease.
It's not a disease process. I tell them, I'll get moms that are pregnant and they'll get the common cold and call and go, oh, I'm pregnant now. I said, you're pregnant, but that's just part of being in your body. You're going to have common colds and allergies, and pregnancy doesn't bring that to you. That's part of living in a human body. If your body is healthy, and the biggest thing in our culture right now is education. Mm-hmm. Learning, like you said. I had a screening this morning with a lady, and it's like her third kid coming. Mm-hmm. And there were so many things about what went wrong and what went on.
Did she have the two at home?
At the hospital. First two at the hospital.
So this is her first home birth.
This first home birth. And the first two, she's talking, and I'm taking that opportunity. She may not hire me. So my big thing is I'm an educator. Mm-hmm. So as she's going through her birth history, I'm like, so were you in bed the whole time? Because we don't work real good laying down. We work better with gravity.
I learned that too. I got up and walked.
Yeah. Were you healthy? Well, I had high blood pressure and I had sugar problems and I didn't exercise. And so she's kind of reassessing herself backwards. Mm-hmm. It's like, so what are we doing different this time that would make you a wise candidate to have a home birth because you've eliminated potentials of problems? Because there are things that you set yourself up for.
Yep.
If you don't exercise, and the hippies of the 60s said junk in, junk out. The human body's that way. If you feed it junk, then don't expect it to deal with what is a healthy process, pregnancy.
Yes.
In a healthy way. Because what you're doing is you're throwing another process on a body that's already struggling just to maintain health for that one person. Now you've got two people. So it does make a big difference. I get ridiculed a little bit because my standards are pretty high.
Oh, yeah.
I can't fix anything that you've broken. Mm-mm. I can educate you about how you can fix it, how you can have a functional lifestyle, how you can eat better. I'm a very big stickler for nutrition. And I always tell it, there's a nice doctor that I've studied along with several years. He said, you can eat 20% junk as long as you eat 80% good. He said, but you can't switch those two things around.
Yep.
You cannot eat vegetarian, all whole foods, great, good proteins 20% of the time, and the rest of the time live out of a fast food window. You can't do that because the body will get back at you for it. It'll pay for it.
If not now, when you get older.
Oh, yeah. If not both, definitely when you get older. Definitely when you get older.
You figure that out right quick.
Yeah. I tell that, because when I started, most of my clients, I was in my 20s. Mm-hmm. At least 75% of my mothers were older than me. Now, of course, that's switched because I'm now 60 and all my clients are younger than 40. And I try to tell them, I said, you may not believe this, but when I went to high school, there weren't any Coke machines. In fact, Leaksville, where I went to high school at, didn't have a Coke machine till the second half of our senior year. And we were like, wow, we get a soda machine on campus. There were no vending machines. We didn't have those kind of things. Mm-mm. Now they're everywhere. And I was telling this mom today, I said, there's nothing wrong with sugar. God made sweet stuff. He made us like them. We were just never meant to have hourly doses.
Exactly.
You know, and there's nothing wrong with, you know, with eating the sweets and the desserts and the good stuff. Not to the level that we indulge now. And I can see the women that I took on I caught my first baby as a midwife in 1986. It's the first time I'd let anybody call me that, because I just had too much reverence for that title. It just was too important to me. And you know, the women I served then, the women that found me then, before internet, before Facebook, before websites.
That's what I was going to say.
Before all that, you know, somebody told somebody that told somebody. It was funny because when they came to me, they already ate good.
Mm-hmm.
They already exercised. They were already healthy. They'd probably already read all those books you read.
Mm-hmm.
They had a birth plan. I was the last puzzle piece.
Yes.
I figured out what I want. I know how to make it happen. Now I need to go find a woman.
Yes. Well, that's kind of where I was at when I
Right.
was looking, because I already had read everything. I
You
already
should have
knew.
grabbed me and shook me harder.
Yeah. Well, I didn't know back then. I didn't even know there was a midwife. This was in 84, 85.
Yeah, I wasn't
And,
open to doing anything then.
Yeah. And so when I was looking for somebody, the girl that next door to me, she lived right down the road. I didn't know her at the time, but through the grapevine, because we didn't have internet then. Through the grapevine, somebody said, "Hey, look, the lady down the road had a 10-pound baby at home." And I'm like, "You have got to be kidding me." I'm thinking a home birth. So what do? I go knocking on the door. And I go in, and she lets me in, and this was her third or fourth child. And she had had 2 or 3 of them at home already. This was in 84, 85. It was probably early 85. And she let me in. We talked a while, and she told me things. She gave me her midwife's information and stuff. And I called the midwife, and I talked to her. My son was born in May, and the 28th of May. So in January, February, whenever this was, I was already pretty far along. And when I called the midwife, she said, "I don't take anybody that far along." And you probably are the same way. You want initially, you find out you're pregnant, call within the first couple of 3 months,
Well,
right?
the thing is, you can, my standard is, you need to be in touch with me and under care by 16 weeks.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is to see that lady before the heaviness, the requirements of pregnancy are taking their toll. Because if they're not looking real good before 16 weeks, after 26 weeks, they're not going to look good either.
Yeah.
So,
And well, she gave me some tips and different things on what her midwife had told me, and it came in handy because I had 3 home births. My husband at the time delivered all 3. We had good, healthy children, and the deal is, the tips she gave me were wonderful, you know, and it was something that I would never have found in a book. Not the tips she gave me were not in books, or
Right.
if they were, I didn't find them. And so to this day, I'm thankful. My oldest daughter decided, the friend that I went to Renata's house with, Stephanie, she was going through the midwifery thing. She wanted, my daughter was pregnant, my oldest daughter. She wanted to assist her birth, or at least attend. And my daughter had agreed, and my daughter backed out the last minute. Like the last week, she thought she could have a baby at home. This was her first baby, and she was gung-ho, I'm going to have it at home. And then she decided she's going to the hospital, but Stephanie could still come. And then last minute, when it finally hit, my daughter can't take pain. I don't know how in the world she thought she was going to go through childbirth at home, but she can't take pain. So she backed out. She went to the hospital, had the baby before she even called Stephanie, so she didn't get to attend. But the same daughter just had twin girls, healthy, 7-pound each twin girls at 9 months. She carried them full term. That is not something that most people do. And she maintained her health throughout, and she was over 40 years old when she did it.
that's
So
impressive.
That's very impressive.
Well, it's hard for most women to grow one healthy 7-pound kid. And when
She grew 2.
And they've got to up their game when you're
Yeah.
feeding 2 kids. Because, one of the things when I talk about nutrition with people is like, here's your plate. Okay, you've got a little person growing inside. Where's their plate? And you don't have to eat it all at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I'm old enough that I've heard people say, well, now you're eating for 2. Well, don't eat for 2. Or, and it's gone back and forth. It was like, everything mama takes into her body is shielded from the baby by the placenta. And then it was, well, some things are. And now they know the only thing that doesn't get through the placenta is red blood cells. Every other drug, every other toxin, every other waste goes to your baby, and you share it with your baby.
Mm-hmm.
And so teaching mothers that, you don't have to eat that little saucer we call him peanut, for peanut then, but 2 hours later you might ought to give him something. Or, I met a lady at our church the other day that doesn't want a midwife, but she said, I just can't eat. I just don't feel like eating. I said, but this is not just about you. I said, if
morning sickness kicked in. And
I'm like, okay, think about this. If you had a 2-year-old in front of you, would you really go? And her husband ratted her out. He said, she didn't eat anything for 8 hours. I said, well, that's why he felt bad. I said, but can you imagine telling your 2-year-old he can't have anything to eat for 8 hours? Mm-hmm. I said, because that's what you're telling this kid.
Yep.
And you could see the light bulb go on. And she's like, okay, I'm going to try. I said, set an alarm on your smartphone. I said, eat a handful of grapes, a handful of almonds. Something.
Snack on something.
Something. I mean, I know it's hard, but you got to break the chain. I said, what makes you nauseous is your blood sugar's dropping. I said, and every time your blood sugar drops, you go, ooh. I said, so make sure it doesn't happen.
Yep.
I said, I hated so much being sickly with my first kid, the vomiting, that I made up my mind in 4 years I'd figure out what caused that to make it go away. And I did. And the remedy was so simple. And your midwife probably shared that. Just nibble on something every hour or two. Mm-hmm. You don't have to have a T-bone steak and a big meal. Just a half a cup of something. Some pineapples, a half a peanut butter and jelly
After
sandwich.
having 5 kids, and the last 3 at home, that's something. I was sick with some of them I wasn't. Different kids, different things. But, you found out that keeping something with you all the time, that was one of the best keys to having a home birth that I know. And so, one thing, it is legal in Mississippi. Let's touch on the legalities a little bit on what people can and can't do, and then kind of help them, steer them to how to find a midwife or a doula.
Okay. In the state of Mississippi right now, it is legal to hire a midwife and pay her. So there's nothing illegal there. We do not have legalization or registration of midwives in Mississippi right now, which unfortunately Mississippi has less than 10 practicing midwives in the entire state, which is horrible, because with the circumstances of the last 24 months, people have flocked to having home births again. And like I said earlier, the problem with that is, are you even a candidate? Do the hazards of being in the hospital environment outweigh your personal hazards?
And you can only take so many.
And
you can't do everybody. You'd have to turn a lot down.
Yeah, me and God had to come to probably about 2000 when my caseload, because I practice by myself. I don't have a partner. I don't even have constant students. Students come and then they go back to where they came from. And I love that, growing the next generation of midwives. But about 2000, at that point going into it, I had kids. They were all at home, and then all of a sudden they were grown and gone. And so every January I'm sitting there rewriting my contract, making sure I need to change anything, fix it. And my sweet little CEO husband was overlooking my shoulders, and I've got this little thing in there that says, I serve 1 to 2 babies a month. And he's like, isn't that kind of like putting God in a box? And I'm like, dang. So I went back and changed the number, and it was like God heard. Wow, boom. And every midwife I know in 2000, their caseload pretty much doubled. Wow. So I went up to 30 to 40, where I had been around 20. And I served, at that point in time, a 2-hour radius of where I live at that point in time. And we clugged on pretty hard until 2015. And we moved back up to Lucedale on our little homestead. Got a 13-acre little log house up there and a little office building. And I realized 5 years after we moved in, Lord, I was meeting myself coming and going. And, I had other colleagues that say, well, if you just don't spend as much time doing prenatal education, if you just don't do
the important part,
if you just don't, do so much postpartum care and help. And it's like, and it didn't take me long. I wouldn't be insultive to them, but it's like, you are more than welcome if that's what your ladies are okay with. My prenatal visits are 1.5 to 2 hours long, and they always have been, and they will stay that way. My postpartum visits, same thing there, if not longer. I schedule my appointments. In fact, I've got a new student that came in from Texas, and she had to wrap her brain around the fact that sometimes I'll sit there and talk to them 3 hours.
And sometimes that's what they need.
And my moms know that if they have to wait for the one before them to finish, they know that if that was reversed, then the other person would have to do the same thing. And I just choose to do that. At one short period of time, I really did try to decrease my prenatal visits in time to an hour. And I thought, because I would see 6 or 7 a day, and at the end of the day, it's like, man, did I tell them everything? Wow, I didn't. So I ended up making notes on their chart for the next visit. And I thought, no, this is not what I want. And so we changed the fabric, you know. A lot of the other midwives in Mississippi thought, well, she's going to retire. It's like, no, we're going to reset. And I had this wonderful saged midwife that I met years and years ago. She's now in her late 80s. She said, in the same way you started. What made you love it to start with? Do it the same way. She said, so what's the difference? I said, too many. I said, I feel like I'm not doing my job the way I want to do it. I think I was doing it more than adequately compared to today's standards, but it wasn't what I wanted.
Yeah.
I mean, if
You
I
still
go,
felt too many.
I felt too many. So, starting in 2015, for a year, I made my website go away. I thought, that's one way, we'll make the website go away. And came off all the
They
social.
still knew you.
Yeah, Mississippi's a very quaint little state. And so everybody knows everybody that's living the weird homesteading, homeschooling, home birthing kind of lifestyle. So everybody knows everybody. And I was still doing 20 to 30 a year. It got me down a little bit. And then I decreased my radius down to an hour and a half, and I drew a very specific boundary on where I'd go. That got me down a little bit more. It took me about 4 years to get under 20. And this year I'm back up to 20 again, but we've had a couple of little clusters of babies. Like, okay, I didn't like that. I didn't like, I mean, I am 60, and I want to be able to go to a mom's house postpartumly, and if she needs her laundry done,
Do it.
or if
Help
she
out.
needs a meal, I mean, that's what our ancestor midwives did.
Exactly.
They came and they cooked a meal, or they brought food, and they got the toddlers out of the house where mama could take a nap, or
They said, Dad, go find something to do.
yeah, just go away and leave the girls alone. And I enjoy doing it that way. I do consider myself a very traditional midwife in the way I practice. Just for the consumers out there that might hire a midwife, there are a lot of different categories of midwife. If you go to my website, which is birthing-options.com, there's a list of questions on there. And when I put my website back up, the reason I did was not to get clients. I didn't need that. But I realized with all the different flavors of midwives out there, consumers needed to know the right questions to ask.
Yes.
So I put a whole page of questions out there. Ask them. If you get the answer that makes you happy, then you found the right midwife. But be thorough. There are, in the state of Mississippi, there are certified nurse midwives. There's nurse midwives, but they can only practice in hospitals by their state board of nursing. There are direct entry midwives called DEMs, and those are people that may not have to be a nurse at all. They just started practicing midwifery. They could either have been self-taught, or they could be, maybe they went off and trained with somebody a little bit, but they don't have any credentials. There is a category called certified midwives that mainly comes out of the East Coast. You don't see any of those down in our part of the country, and it's not nationally recognized to most people. The most common out-of-hospital birthers now are called CPMs, Certified Professional Midwives. Those people have either grandmothered, well, grandmothering in is pretty much gone. I think I was the last year that they did that. I think I had done maybe 300 or 400 births by the time I did that. Now they have something called the PEP program, which is you have to do 75 births, I think 50 actually. It changed recently, under supervision, and you have to take the national board. Or you can go to a college, which unfortunately Mississippi doesn't have any, which is great. I mean, that's where I was. There was a point in time I went to nursing school, going to be a certified nurse midwife, and I got to my third year, which was maternal child, and Mississippi State had a midwifery program, and they shut it down that year. I went, so where am I at here, God? Because I had 3 small kids. I'm not leaving them going somewhere else to do college.
Yeah.
So it redirected me. So I guess my point would be to ask. Mississippi has, last time I counted, 8 practicing midwives. And
Which is not a lot
Oh
for
gosh,
this
no.
state. So what would people do if they were looking for a midwife? We're going to put a link in the description that they can go to your site and see the questions you're asking.
Yeah.
But if you're booked up,
Where
which
do they
you
go?
are booked up right now.
I'm good
And,
all the way through February right now.
Yeah.
I don't know what
So
we're going to do with that.
yeah. So how would they go about? What kind of words would they type in? What would be the
Type in midwife. If you type in Mississippi midwife, you'll see several pop up. There are maybe 2 that practice on the coast of Mississippi. I'm kind of in the middle, Hattiesburg, Lucedale, and I go all the way down to the coast area. There's one, let me think about that, northeast of Hattiesburg, and then you jump all the way to the north.
So other states, though, each state would have the
Each
same.
state, yeah, you just, I
Yeah.
mean, they've linked it right. Most states have a midwifery organization.
Okay.
There is Mississippi Midwives Alliance here in Mississippi. There's also Better Births of Mississippi.
Mhm.
Is a great place to find doulas as well as assistants and midwives. We do have, I mean, ever since our stuff's changed a year or two ago, you know, there's been a run on midwives because people don't want to be in the hospital. I do kind of laugh because when I get people that call me, it's like, you do know if you really wanted to find germs, the favorite place to go would be the hospital hall. It's not like it's a new thing, but it is making people think more about, like you said a while ago, you're not sick. If I'm healthy, why would I go to the hospital?
Exactly.
Because in reality, you know, less than 10% of pregnancies should have complications in a healthy mother.
Yes.
Of that 10%, probably 5%, if you've got a good caregiver, they can see them coming.
But it was a lot of it is scare tactic too.
Oh, yes.
Because I went through that with my first one. When people found out, because I didn't tell anybody I wasn't going to the doctor. For a long time, I did not tell anybody. But when people found out I hadn't, because by the time you're 6 months, 7 months, they're saying, so what did the doctor say?
Yes.
And I'm like, I hadn't been. What do you mean you hadn't been? And I got all the questions, all the people downing me for not going to the doctor. I said, I'm healthy. And when I did have that child at home, I got it from all ways. Everybody came down on me, why did you do that? And I said, because I didn't have the first 2 times the best experience. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't the best. And I just wanted to stay home. It's natural, it's natural. And I kept telling people it's natural. And they had one person tell me, and he was a preacher, come to me and he said, now, Miss Wanda, if you had just let the church know, we would have paid for you to go to the hospital. And I was like,
That's not the point.
I said, no, that's not what I want. People don't understand that it's natural and that 90% of the women can have a baby by themselves. They're scared to.
Yeah.
They're just scared.
Well, I always try to remind people that if you go back before 1945,
Mm-hmm.
probably 95 or better percent of all humans born that year were born at home.
Exactly.
Like both of my parents were. They were born in 26 and 37. All of their siblings were born at home up to the 50s. 52, I think, was my last aunt or uncle. They were still born at home.
Mm-hmm.
But once it got into the medical world, and once again, I'll always
Our
tell
culture.
you, our culture changed, and it just, there's this neat little book, what is it? Medicine, Witches, and Warlocks, and it talks about how in Britain, and it's documented, it's a historical document, the Britain Colleague of Brethren, they call them, the physicians, decided that they could get into birthing in a family with childbirth. They had income security for the rest of their life because that mother would have such loyalty towards them that she would call them every time the kid got sniffles and snorts. So they were good for 20 years. And I do get that. I get the loyalty because, and I hold it very sacred because I know that most of the mothers, I think that I could easily say, will look at me and say, what do you want me to do?
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm very careful about making sure that they don't do what I want them to do, that they know their options. That you can, I'm not having this baby. I've had my, I even I've caught 4 of my daughter's kids, and I had to really practice that with her. It's like, this is your birth, your body, and your baby. I'm going to tell you everything you can choose from, and I support your choice. I've already made my choices. I've had my kids.
Yeah.
And that's not what we usually get in the medical world.
No.
We're, like you said, we're pressed and scared to go the way they would prefer us go, with very little education and very little informed choice.
I mean, like I said, I had 2 babies. I knew very little about the birthing process. When I started studying those books, I figured out how little I knew. And I was very shocked at all the, and two, the thing that people were trying to scare me into, what if you have something happen at home? 90% of the time, the home births have nothing go wrong, and in plenty of time to get to a hospital, usually. Now, there's an occasional time, and if you had, in all your practice so long, have you had one that you did have to go to a hospital? Or,
Oh, yeah.
So you knew in plenty of time to say, hey, get something here now, let's get to the hospital. I knew that going in,
Yeah.
and as a woman that had two at home, two in the hospital already, I already knew that my body could handle childbirth. Some women are smaller and have more difficulty, but if you don't have physical issues and you are a healthy person, it is a natural process, and that's what I wanted people to understand. It is natural.
My smallest women have my biggest babies.
Yeah.
You got this little,
Usually they do.
You got this little 98-pound, 5-foot tall woman who has a 10-pound baby on the floor at the end of her bed on a pallet. And it's like, okay, that worked. And then it's even more amazing when she previously had 2 births where she needed cesareans for 6-pound babies. It's like, oh, okay, so you grew after 30. Okay, that's the first timer.
Yeah.
But it does make a big difference where I always encourage people, ask questions, talk to your friends, go visit midwives. If you're looking for a certified professional midwife, you can go to NARM, North American Registry of Midwives, and they have a directory of the CPNs across the country, and you can usually find that. But honestly, whatever state you're in, if you type in your state and midwife, you're probably going to find a rabbit trail to lead you to where they are.
Yeah.
You know, when I get people that say, well, I just couldn't find you at 2 months, but I can find you at 8.5. I'm like, girl, I can type in my name. I can type in Mississippi midwife any day of the week, and I'm in the top 5 things there somewhere.
Yeah.
You know, so it does make a difference.
Well, I do believe that in our culture, in our time, a period in history, that this is going to be something, and as I said, not calling you old.
It's okay. I'm older than I was yesterday.
But you are aging out. You are backing down because you can't handle the travel. You couldn't take on 50 kids right now. I mean,
no.
if you had 50 births, that's way
I didn't
too
like them
much.
when I had them.
Yeah, and that's too much.
We need more midwives. And when I first started, there was a great book I had. It was called Helping Hands by Carla Hartley. And I remember when I was at that point where I was like, oh my gosh, does God really want me to be a midwife? And I mean, it was. If you've ever been called by God or God's told you to do something, it'll get in your spirit person and it'll just churn.
Yeah.
And it was churning really hard. And I got this book and I went down to Gulf Shores, Alabama by myself for a 3-day weekend to have a little go-to with Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sitting there reading that and thinking, you know, Lord, really? Seriously? Ain't nobody going to believe I'm going to do this. You know, I'm walking away from a different profession, a different avenue, and they're going to have a heyday with this. Mm-hmm. And it listed in there literally, what can you see yourself doing in 10 years? Where could you see yourself being in 10 years? And I didn't know what I was doing then. I thought, okay, if childbirthing in Mississippi could change in 10 years, what would I like? I would like there to be, 25 childbirth educators, at least that many doulas, or people that help women at birth wherever their environment is, and at least, 10 to 20 midwives spread across the state. Mm-hmm. Of course, I probably should have added the detail competent midwives. I didn't add that detail because I think every midwife of any age looks at some younger midwives and goes,
Is there a way to check the competency or to check?
Referrals is the best thing, because I mean, you can get people that have gone, and this is a big conflict within our culture right now too. You can have certain people that go to places and get their education in 18, 24 months, get their births at a birth center in a year. I mean, I had a little student one time that came back from the Philippines. This had been probably 8 years ago. Had gone down there and stayed for 1 year. And in 1 year, she had worked at a birth center, got all her birth numbers, and a smart little girl, single woman, went past her norms immediately, did not know anything about how to deliver outside of an institute. So in the middle of the night, when something does go wrong or does go different, there's no button to push. There's no other person to call.
There's nobody there.
So her critical thinking venue was not in place.
Yeah.
And so that it did make some issues, and she, I think, ended up going back to a birth center at one point in time. Checking, big thing, and I do this all the time, and I usually ask my moms, which I don't have a problem. I have a problem with my moms referring me to too many people. Which is sweet, but I still have to process a lot. But ask that midwife that you interview, whoever she is, can I have the people that you've attended this year? And if they're not okay with calling those last 10 moms, like I have photos for each year of my babies on my website. And so, or I try to keep up with that pretty much. And I'll say, go call them, and I'll call them ahead of time and tell my previous client, answer any questions they've got, just as honest as you can. And I mean, I'm sure I'm just, I always at the end, at their last postpartum visit, they always laugh at me, especially my repeats, because they know it's coming. It's like week number 6. Okay, so I'm done. babies weighed, birth certificate's done. I'm not touching you physically anymore. So what did I do that you did or didn't like, or wished I would or wouldn't have done? And I can't do anything harmful to you at this point in time. And I tell them honestly and sincerely, that's what has made me a better midwife through the years.
Because when they give you that feedback, you go, okay, if I do this and this one doesn't like it, maybe I need to back off in that.
Yeah.
If it's not a critical point of the
That's right.
service.
Well, because when I first started, I didn't have any formal education. Now, in the process of the first 10 years, I spent 2 summers at 2 different teaching birth centers, getting experience that I wasn't going to get. High risk, high level birth centers that got everything. I mean, I caught my first set of twins, my first breech, all that kind of stuff. Because I didn't get that in my practice. I had low risk people. You know, decades later, yes, I've caught several sets of twins and several breeches. And
I get a variety.
Get a little bit more now. So breeches don't freak me out anymore. It's like, oh, different part. So we just go with that, and God gets them out of there the same way. But I do tell women, you know, question your potential midwife.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're a praying woman, which I hope you are, pray for God to give you the right person.
Yes.
And to give you peace about, there are, just like with doctors, no different, just like with doctors and nurses and any other profession, there are people out there that we really wish weren't in that profession.
Yeah. And 2, we're going to end with this note. Always, it is your body, your baby. And she's here to help. She's not here to tell you what to do, except if push.
Oh, you don't have to tell them that.
Yeah, it comes natural. I believe me. I found that out. You don't have to. I tried that with the first one, and I'm like, what am I doing this for?
Yeah.
But anyway, we're not going there. But always, it is you, and she is here to assist. She's here for education, and your midwife should be education.
Yes.
You should know what you're doing and where you're going and why you're going there.
Yeah, same as it was 35 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Getting a midwife should be the last piece of your puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
You should already be healthy. You should already know why you're having a home birth. You should already know why you don't want a hospital birth if you don't want one. And I will say this, home birthing is not for everybody.
No. Mm-hmm.
Many people, 1, aren't healthy enough. 2, like you said about your daughter, don't want to deal with the pain. And 3, some people don't want to take that responsibility.
Yes, it freaks a lot of people out.
And I point out to people, I'm only 49% of the team.
Yeah.
I don't ever get the majority vote. Mm-hmm. I'm the visitor in their home, not the other way around.
Yes. And so keep that in mind. Renata, thank you for coming.
Thank you. Good to see you.
She's probably going to be around occasionally. And if you have any questions, we will try to post her website, and you can go check it out. Even if you just have a question that you want to ask generically.
There's a little contact.
Yeah, you can ask generically, and you live in a different state, whatever. She can help you. She's not giving medical advice, but she could say, in your state, look up this or whatever. But you got Google. You know, that's what Danny tells people.
Just
You got
Google
just Google it.
Yeah.
You know, and we're going to continue the series as I find women that I think are of interest.
Yeah.
We're going to do women's stories, and she is my modern midwife. You know,
Thank you.
the midwifery thing is something that a lot of people just do not think too much about. But I do believe, as you have, if you're in your teens to 50, because some people will have had them at 50.
47 was my oldest, first-time mom.
So teens to 50, you can still get pregnant unless you've had surgeries or taken something, and sometimes you can still get pregnant. If you have a daughter, a granddaughter, cousins, nieces, things like that, you might want to kind of have an idea and help answer questions, because that was one thing that took me by storm, was having daughters and knowing that they were going to grow up in a world that may or may not allow them in the hospital. Up until this past 24 months, they've been allowed in the hospital. All of a sudden, here it is.
Changed.
It's changed. It's not that they're not allowed, but it is different to get into a hospital. The fear's there, and people want something different. Check out midwives if you are inclined in any way, or if you just have questions. Sometimes just the information helps with the pregnancy.
If I can help, I'll be glad.
You know, that's what I think. So, guys, thank you for stopping by. Thank you, Renata, and we'll see who's next. Thank you, guys, from Crazy Days.